Hopefully everybody has a program. We're gonna start by singing a song which I know my dad liked, and but it's really about being part of the family here and everything, and it's in your program there if you'd like to sing along, and even if you don't want to sing along, it's still in your program.
Good afternoon. I think I've greeted most of you. I'm Reverend Don Baldwin, and I welcome you. I probably have known Jim longer than any of you. I met Jim when I was in high school, and Jim was in high school, and I was in Merced. My dad was the Methodist minister in Merced, and Jim was living in Burlingame and was very active in the Methodist Youth Fellowship. And so he and I probably met at a summer camp somewhere during our junior or senior year, how many years ago was that? 1950, well, let's see, I graduated from high school in 54. So how old does that make me? Almost 86? Jim's a longtime friend, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I greet you in the name of our wonderful God, of our Lord Jesus Christ, and we gather in the communion and fellowship of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God that gives us life, gives us meaning, supports every endeavor of our lives. And so it's a pleasure to honor Jim. It really is. I'm sad to see him go, but I'm sure he was ready. And some of you know that I know very closely. My wife died just 2 years ago yesterday. And so if I cry, it's not only because I'm losing Jim, one of my longest friends, but also because my wife Peggy is still in my heart. I'd like to read a scripture or two that always speak to me about our lives. From the Psalms, we have these words. Lord, You have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever there was formed the earth or the world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Thou dost sweep people away. We are like a dream, like grass which is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers. So, Lord, teach us to number our days, that we may get hearts of wisdom. Let thy work be manifest to thy servants, and thy glorious power to thy children. Let the favor of you, our God, be upon us, and establish thou the work of our hands upon us. The work of our hands, establish thou it. And then a brief reading from Psalm 121. Some of you I know love the mountains like I do, have lived in the mountains, go to the mountains. The psalmist obviously loved, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From whence does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. The Lord will not let your foot be moved. The one who keeps you will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. The Lord will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forward and forevermore. Would you join me in prayer? Oh, loving God, you are our wonderful creator, sustainer, ever-present guide. We thank you so much for this chance to remember Jim, your servant. In each of our various relationships to him, may we find new meaning and blessing from our connection to his life. So bless us as we gather to honor him, to remember him, to learn from him, that we might go from this place together with a sense of gratitude, new understanding, and a deep appreciation for his life. Lord, teach us to number our days, that in your Spirit we may get hearts of wisdom and love in your eternal life. We pray in your precious and holy name, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So, Jim, we're going to sing again.
There are hymnals there in the pews, and if you would turn to number 474. My stepmother Diane said that this was one of my dad's favorites. Precious Lord, take my hand. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on in the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the light draws near, and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
One of the blessings of being a minister is that one has a chance to get acquainted with a person that you thought you knew for either a short or a long time. And you learn so many things in a memorial service, both in your own reflection, but also as other people share their life experience with that person. I always go away with a sense of, well, a little sadness that I didn't know more about the person when they were alive. Some things I was glad I didn't know. But it's amazing to me how Jim and my life intertwined in so many different ways. And it reminded me, as I was reflecting on this afternoon, how very real our coincidences, our meetings interact and interplay. The reality of the pain of our lives, the joy of our lives, the commitments of our lives, the amazing twists and turns. The fact that I knew Jim when we were both in college. I went to College of Pacific before it was University of the Pacific. I entered there in 1954. Jim was a little younger than I, so he was a little later than I. But it's funny how I remember one thing about Jim that still sticks in my mind. And that was, we both, after I'd been in a fraternity, I decided I didn't like fraternity life, and I moved back into North Hall, the dormitory. And Jim was in the North Hall dormitory, and we were standing in the hallway, and it wasn't really a debate, but it was a conversation, a heated conversation about philosophy and what was true, and how you could discern by thinking about things, what was true or not. And I was so not interested. Jim was smart, and he was, his philosophy teacher was my philosophy teacher, and I didn't get most of it. And Jim got all of it. And in the hallway, I can still hear that debate going on with Jim just insisting that this was the right way to look at it, and this was the right way to configure your thinking. And I thought, I don't care. I don't know exactly what year it was, but I may have even dated Barbara before Jim did. Can you believe that? Well, it wasn't a date, Barbara. We went painting at the ocean. And we sat on a bluff, and I did a watercolor. I think you were doing watercolor painting. I saved mine. She didn't save hers. Anyway, Jim and I were both a part of the United Methodist Council, the youth ministry. We did all kinds of things together. Some I can't tell you about, but most of them were legitimate. We sang in a quartet. We had the conference council had a quartet with Bill Neatman and Eddie View and Jim Lynn and Don Baldwin, and we sang at all the district conventions. We sang at conference events. We went to the same summer camps at Monte Toyon and Skylandia up at Tahoe. We were guided and mentored by the most wonderful conference youth director named Bob Carey. And some of you may have heard his name, but Bob was one of the most wonderful, gentle, but like the iron fist in the velvet glove. He was really powerful, but generous and supportive. And when he retired after some 20 to 30 years as the Methodist Conference youth director, he came out of the closet and told everyone that he was a gay man all these years. And we were so appreciative of that awareness that here was a man. It really changed our lives and our thinking about the gay and lesbian movement of the time. And that was very long ago. And Bob Carey influenced our lives in our ministries and our relationships. And I know Jim and I felt the same way about that experience. So then after college, I went around the world with my dad while Jim and Barbara went on to Drew Theological School. And I had already enrolled in Drew when I got back from around the world trip. So when I came back in 1959 and entered seminary, who was there but Jim and Barbara? In fact, I knew David before any of you did. David was born, 1960? 62. And John, 65. And I graduated from Drew in 64 and came back to California with my wife. I met her in New York City, and we were both from California. So I was appointed the minister in Yosemite, eat your heart out. And Jim served was it Hopeville? Hopewell. What a good name for a city, huh? Hopewell. And another little town.
Windsor.
What was it?
Windsor.
Oh, Windsor, New Jersey. And then came back to California and served a number of churches here. What wonderful a history to connect. I was doing audiovisual shows and in the various churches that Jim had. He would invite me to come and do my audiovisual shows. When I started doing performances of John Muir, he started inviting me to come to his various churches. I also did John Wesley impersonations. So Jim was always one of the first ones to line me up to come and do John Wesley impersonations. I mean, it's just a wonderful, wonderful friendship. When he married Diane and retired, we visited them in Los Osos, Peggy and I. We would stay with them. We would go have fish dinners. We would walk on the beach. We just had a wonderful time visiting with them and staying overnight. And then when they moved to Oregon, my brother lives in Oregon, so it was a really nice opportunity. Also, another clergy friend and wife, Scott Autry's wife, was living there with her new husband. And so we would visit, the six of us would get together in Albany and have wonderful meal, have a great lunch together as we traveled through Oregon. We went to Newport, and we would have more fish dinners and go to the Maritime Museum, and just the depth of that friendship, even though it wasn't frequent, it was always genuine, it was real, and we shared so much. our love of music. I was going to be a band leader. And my best friend, who I did his memorial service last week, the longest friendship I've ever had from junior high school, 5th grade in Merced, and I did his memorial service. It's that time of year, I guess, and my time of life when the rainbow arc begins to get near the pot of gold. I'm not eager to see that pot of gold, but Jim, we loved music, and he would always tell us about the choir that he sang in, the Presbyterian Church in Newport. We really shared the love of music, but I think more than that, the way he supported Diane in her illnesses and the way she supported him, they had a lovely and really loving, supportive relationship, and we could tell that. Jim, I can still hear his laugh. Can you hear it? Can you hear his laugh? I don't know quite how to imitate it, but it was wonderful. And his passion for justice, for peace, his work, really was impressive. He was always, in my thinking, just the epitome of a versatile and passionate and pastoral care minister. And I'm really grateful that he's been a part of my life. People like that influence one's life. You feel the blessing of their life and how it's blessed you. And so I invite you, whatever your connection was to Jim, that whatever blessing you can take today from that wonderful relationship. Things aren't always easy. Family relationships are messy and difficult and painful and rub the raw edges of our lives. And we honored those too. We embrace the difficulties of life, but we also go beyond that to honor the person whose life is very much a part of ours and who influenced us in so many ways. And so I say thank you, Jim, for your friendship, for our long relationship, and ask God's blessing upon his life as we remember him in the Spirit of God. Amen.
I think you all know me, but I'm David Lynn, Jim's son. And yes, he did love music. And when I was little, I loved listening to his records of some of his favorite artists. And he passed a number of them on to me when I was young, when I was about 10 or so. And he moved out. And he left behind several record albums that he knew that I really enjoyed listening to. And some of them were great songwriters like Roger Miller. The Beatles left me a Beatles record, and they became some of my favorite songwriters. And I later became a songwriter, and I was inspired by a lot of those things. And one of the main groups that really inspired me on those records that he left me all 5 Simon & Garfunkel records. And I learned, I say, yeah, I went to school and I studied music and things like that, but I really first learned harmony from Simon & Garfunkel and the Beatles, especially. And still, they're some of my favorite things to listen to. And so we put together one of the Simon & Garfunkel songs that he enjoyed and that we enjoy, called Scarborough Fair Canticle.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember once was a true love of mine. Tell her to make me a cambric shirt,
deep forest green,
parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme.
sparrow on snow-crested brown,
Without no seams or leaves and words,
the child of the mountain,
she shall be a true love of mine.
unaware of a clarion call.
Tell her to find me an acre of land,
Sprinkling of leaves,
parsley, sage, rosemary, and
washes the grave
thyme.
with silvery tears.
Between the salt water and the sea strand,
Polishes a gun.
then she'll be a true love of mine. Tell her to reap in a sickle of leather,
Scarlet battalion,
parsley, sage, rosemary, and
generals
thyme.
order their soldiers to kill and to fight for a cause they long ago
Then
forgotten.
she'll be a true love of mine. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She once was a true love of mine.
We have a few times in the service that I'll have some folks from the family and other folks as well to come up and share if they want to about Jim. Again, I'm David, and I think most of you know me by now. Wanted to read you something that when he and Diane were living in Porterville, my dad had joined Rotary, and there was a special award that they were giving out one year, and somebody had typed up these things about him and about his life, and I found it amongst his things and wanted to share some of these things with you, some of his history. This is the Paul Harris recipient. This was December 8th, 1992. It says, this Paul Harris fellow was born in Ohio, the Buckeye State, in 1938. As his father transferred to Pennsylvania, Washington, and California with his employment, he had an opportunity to attend schools in these states, completing high school at San Mateo. He lettered in track and enjoyed basketball, even though he was not of the usual height for that game and probably came up to the armpits of some of the players. Then it was off to College of Pacific, where he graduated with honors and went on to Drew Theological Seminary. Upon completion of his studies, he was ordained an elder in the Southern New Jersey Conference of the United Methodist Church. A dissertation on church history later, he was awarded a PhD from Princeton. After serving 2 churches in New Jersey, he returned to what he had come to call home, California. He has pastored churches in Sacramento on 3 occasions, as well as Farmersville, Palo Alto, and Marysville. He and his wife have 3 sons and 3 daughters between them, and now they are the proud, happy grandparents of 10 grandchildren. Later, of course, that was more. His dry sense of humor can be illustrated by his puns and a high regard for the Pink Panther movies. He has on more than one occasion attended a Halloween costume party dressed as Inspector Clouseau, and of course, escorting the Pink Panther. He can't resist a pun. His wife occasionally reminds him to give people a chance to know him before letting those puns slip out. Little did he know when he came to Porterville a few years ago that his knowledge of disaster relief matters, being involved in the flood relief efforts in Marysville, would be put to use with the terrible freeze in our area almost 2 years ago. He helped in establishing an interfaith network that brought together many churches and helping agencies to deal with the effects of the freeze on people's lives. After a trip to Ensenada, Mexico, and discovering the needs of a small church there, he was instrumental in getting a group of men together to go down there and perform much-needed repairs on their building. The friendship that was established carried over in the Mexican church, coming up here to cook and prepare dinners for the community. In this manner, they earned much-needed money to continue their ministry, and much goodwill is felt between our cities. He's part of the Porterville Sister Cities program and heads up the current effort to establish a youth exchange between Porterville and our sister city, La Barca. He joined Rotary in 1990, and by now you've probably guessed that this Paul Harris Fellow is James David Lynn. I wanted to share a few remembrances that I have of Dad. I'll try not to repeat too many of the things that I already read. I can largely thank or blame Dad for giving me the desire to perform. Now, of course, my mother Barbara did introduce us kids to theater growing up, and I've kind of grown from that and went on to lots of musical theater and performing on stage, and I thank you for that very much, Mom. But when I was about 3 or 4 years old, I gained the desire to be a comedian from Dad. And if some of you have already heard this story before, I apologize, but I'm going to tell it again anyway. This was the mid-1960s. Cigarette ads were still on TV. There was one Saturday evening, and we lived in the parsonage right next to the church in Hopewell, that my parents went out to dinner or went out to a party or something or other. I don't recall what the story was then. And they got me a babysitter. And I was about 3 or 4 years old. And so after they had left, the babysitter said, "So what do you want to play? Do you have any toys? Or you want to, build something with blocks or anything?" I said, "Yes, I have some blocks." We had these big cardboard blocks that were about this big, and they all folded into themselves, and it had enough to build a wall. So I went upstairs to my bedroom to go and get the blocks to bring them downstairs to the living room. And as my eyes are always bigger than what I realize, I grabbed up a whole bunch of blocks and I was carrying them down the stairs, little kid. And they started to slip out of my arms. And I tripped on them and went head over heels down the stairs. And of course, it was probably some architect's good idea to put a metal radiator at the bottom of the stairs, thinking heat goes upstairs, rises. Smack! Right into the radiator. My parents came home, and the babysitter was beside herself because little Davy had a big black eye, a shiner. And they said, "That's okay, that's all right." But my dad, being the punster that he was, the next morning, I still had the shiner. And he said, "So, Davy, when people at church ask you how you got your black eye, you tell them, 'We Territon smokers would rather fight than switch.'" I got so many laughs from the adults at church that Sunday that I said, "I love this." No, I didn't keep trying to give myself black eyes so that I could do that. Dad was an athlete of types. He went out for sports in high school, probably did it in college, but that continued on in his life. He really enjoyed sports of lots of different kinds. He valiantly tried to teach me sports, and I appreciate his patience because I was not an athlete. My life kind of went in different directions. I took up music and things like that, and that's kind of where my life especially went. But he was into track. He was a runner. He ran most of his life. I had asthma as a kid, so I didn't always keep up, but I did try to go and do it sometimes. But I remember going when he was doing some of the races in town. I remember that we would wait on the sidelines with a bottle of Pepsi for him. And he would run by, and we'd grab it, and he'd chug it down and then run on. Sometimes the Pepsi didn't stay down, but we were cheering him on. He liked basketball. Got another little black eye story from that. Not mine, his. As was mentioned in the story, yes, he was not, being 5'7", he was not as tall as a lot of the other basketball players. And there was one time that somebody was going up for a jump shot, and he was trying to block him, and elbow came right down in my dad's eye and gave him a black eye. But he still stuck with basketball. I remember us playing in Farmersville at shooting some hoops together. He played baseball. He sort of taught me how to throw a baseball. I never got very good at it, but he had some very old, I don't know how old they were, baseball gloves. And I think one was a catcher's glove and another one was, I don't know, one of the other gloves. And I remember later on, when I actually got a glove of my own later in life, I said, this doesn't look the same as those old ones that I think were probably from the 40s or the 50s, those old gloves. He was a swimmer, and he loved to swim. You know, for years, when I was growing up, he would still go out swimming. He wasn't just a swimmer. He didn't just like to do it. He actually was a lifeguard for a while. I remember he had a sweatshirt that had sort of a cross on it that said, safeguard on there. And he tried to teach me swimming, bless him. I was afraid to jump into the pool. I'd be one of those kids where he'd be there in the pool. All right, come on, jump to me. And I outgrew a lot of those things, and I actually do enjoy swimming. But he was all gung-ho with it. Matter of fact, he moonlighted at a number of different things while he was a pastor. He was a bus driver for a while. He was, as I said, a lifeguard at the pool. He was a college professor for a while at College of Sequoias. He was a playwright sometimes, and he did a lot of the work on Circuits to Ride, which is one of the first plays that we were in and traveled around with the Methodist Church on that. He was a choir member, and he sang in choir for years and years, up until probably the last few years of his life. He was singing in choir. He loved to camp, especially backpacking. And we went on a number of youth group trips and things like that with backpacking and camping as a family a lot of times. I remember one time we went backpacking up to Strawberry Valley. Angie, I think you might have been on that backpacking trip. I think I remember counting 16 mosquito bites that I got one night, or was it 24? Anyway, I hadn't brought any bug block along. But we had memorable campfires and skits. I remember one skit that has always stuck in my head. And Angie, I think you were in this skit. I don't want to embarrass you, but it was the skit called The Necessary Papers. You played the queen, and you were sending all these messengers out to get the necessary papers. And they would come up, Your Majesty, the necessary papers. They'd hold out some papers and bow down, and you'd take them and look through them and say, no, these are not the necessary papers. Out. Another one would come in. Your queen, my queen, here you are. She'd look through the papers. No, these are not the necessary papers. Out you go. Finally, one came in. She said, do you have the necessary papers? And he said, yes. And he held up a roll of toilet paper. And she grabbed them and she said, yes, these are the necessary papers. I need to use them. Always stuck in my head. I remember our family went hiking up Mount Lassen, and it was a very hot day. I remember seeing a picture of us all, sweating our way up there and everything. But I remember, some of those hikes and things like that. And I was really glad that he took us along on those and did all the camping that we did. Humor. He inherited his sense of humor from his dad. OK Lynn. Then he mercilessly passed on the puns to John, David, Earl, and me. And my children and fourth grade students will be forever grateful. He was disciplined, but he was kind. I remember, as some of you this may have happened with you, that when you were in trouble, you were referred to by your first and middle name. And I remember when I was real young that David Lawrence, I was like, oh no, what did I do? Yeah. Later on, I actually kind of embraced that. And in our family, I've been known for a lot of as David Lawrence because we had my stepbrother, David Earl. And so I've gotten used to DL or David Lawrence. But after that time, if he said, gosh, Dave, I knew I had disappointed him when he would say that. Make my heart sink. But he was still kind. Books. Oh gosh, Dad loved to read. He had so many books, and I imagine he passed on some of them to some of you. I got some of them as well. He was an avid reader. He gathered so many writings on philosophy, church history, Spanish, alternative health, and medicine. And when I would talk with him on the phone, he was always telling me about something new that he had learned. And a lot of the time, it was outside the usual realm of thinking. You know, some new thing that had been discovered or that was being tried in medicine or in science. He was a hard worker. I remember when we lived in Windsor, New Jersey. He had a room down at the bottom of the stairs, which was his study. And when the door was open, we were welcome to go in there. That's where the record player was. And so sometimes we'd put records on, and you know, we had some big moo-moos that I think we'd gotten from my mom, and we would dance around to Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass and stuff, and it was fun. However, on that door, he also had a stop sign on the door. And if the door was closed and you saw the stop sign, you didn't bother Dad because he was working on a sermon. So he was a hard worker. He was very disciplined. He was a supporter of so many things. I often, at the churches where he was pastor, I would often go and sometimes when he was there on a Saturday or something or other, and I would go along with him, I would go and sit down and play the piano or the organ by myself for a long time. And sometimes on Sunday afternoons or something, I'd, you know, also in some of the rooms, I'd be playing piano or organ. And I remember some of the older ladies in the church would come up and sit around and listen to me play some of the things from my piano lessons and say, oh, he's such a good little boy. And I always felt supported in the things that I did for my dad. He helped me feel like I was a welcome and rightful part of the church. It felt like a second home to me. Probably one of the reasons that, probably one of the reasons that I've been doing music in church since college, regular basis pretty much. I'm music director here at this church and have been since 1992, and was at other churches too, because church music, I just felt so close to the idea of making music in a church and being a part of that ever since I was singing in the choir as a kid in church and things. So I appreciate that, Dad. He was a good driver. I remember there was a time when we were taking a trip up into the hills or something or other, and we were driving along these treacherous roads with these cliffs coming down. And I remember looking out the side window, straight down, you know, hundreds of feet down, and thinking, oh, I'm glad Dad's a good driver. He was a travel guide too. Not literally, that wasn't his job. But he would take us places, and he knew where to go and took us to lots of wonderful places. I remember the trip that we took in 1975 around the country, and went and saw so many things that I still have strong memories of, all these places that we saw and things that we did around that, on that trip. And I remember that he and Diane had a term called the Royal Ripoff. And the Royal Ripoff is when you went to some place, some touristy place or something or other, and they scalped you. They just charged you an arm and a leg for little things. On the other hand, they were always, when they would see antiques for sale, they'd say, "Oh, antiques, antiques, let's go and stop there." So I really appreciate all the things that my dad did for me. My cousin Brian, my dad's sister's son, could not be here, but he asked if he could have me read something from him. Uncle Jim was my mom's brother and my only uncle. He was an integral part of my childhood and early adulthood. He was a very thoughtful and caring man in every way. His voracious appetite for reading and learning elucidated many life lessons for me, and I will always be indebted to him. He and Barb, and later he and Dee, were always extremely kind and generous with their thoughts, time, and love. All characteristics which I know he and my mom learned from their parents, OK and Zelda. Now that they have all been reunited, we have 4 kind souls watching over us. I miss you, Uncle Jim. And I thank you for helping me become a better person. Love, Brian. One more thing, as I was looking through some of my dad's things, I came across a poem. And it says author unknown. And I imagined that he probably read this at a number of other celebrations of life that he officiated. It's called Miss Me, But Let Me Go. When I come to the end of the road and the sun has set for me, I want no rights in a gloom-filled room. Why cry for a soul set free? Miss me a little, but not too long, and not with your head bowed low. Remember the love that we once shared. Miss me, but let me go. For this is a journey that we all must take, and each must go alone. It's all a part of the Master's plan, a step on the road to home. When you are lonely and sick of heart, go to the friends we know and bury your sorrows in doing good deeds. Miss me, but let me go. And now my daughter Melody wanted to share some things about Grandpa.
Thanks a lot. Can't even read what I wrote. Well, it's hard to follow that. But once upon a time, there was a company that painted the roads. And the owner of this company hired a young boy to do specific lines on the roads. On the first day, the young boy painted 3 miles of line on the roads, and the man who hired him was very excited. Great. The next day, the young boy only painted 1.5 miles, and the man said, well, we'll just see what he does tomorrow. The third day, the young boy only painted 0.5 mile, and the man came up to him and said, hey, why are you painting less and less road mileage every day? And the boy said, well, every day I get further, the longer it takes me to get back to the paint can. That that was my favorite joke. He told me a lot of jokes. He told everyone a lot of jokes. As everyone knows, he was always good at making someone laugh or feel special. And that was his favorite joke that he ever told me. I remember the visits that we took to see Grandma and Grandpa Lynn. My fondest were the visits when they lived in Los Osos, or Morro Bay. We visited them many times over lots of Thanksgivings and summers. And one of the times we went in the summer, all of us took a hike next to the ocean, and he stopped and said, "Melody, look." I'm like, "What?" "There's wild dolphins swimming." And at the time, and still, my favorite animal was a dolphin. So he stopped and brought me over and showed me through his binoculars the amazing dolphins that were jumping through the water. And that was the very first time I had ever seen a wild dolphin. There are a lot of things that remind me of Grandpa Lynn that may seem odd or not really significant, but they have brought lasting memories to me. Opening and eating a pomegranate. He was the first person that showed me how to open one and how to eat one. I had never had one before. I didn't even know what it was. I was like, "You eat these little seeds?" And he's like, "Yeah, just take a spoon and eat them." Like, okay. Leather sofas and the smell of leather sofas. My first nap on a leather sofa happened at their house. Shuffleboards. The first time I ever played on a shuffleboard, and probably the last time I ever played on a shuffleboard, was visiting them. And a lot of my favorite bad jokes came from him. The biggest memory of all is when he officiated mine and Jim's wedding in 2015. We called him a few times in the year before that we were married to ask, one, if he would be willing to officiate, and of course he said yes. And we would discuss what he would say. We had no idea. We had never been married before. We didn't know what was said and what to do, but he was such a natural. He just said, "This is the steps that you do." He had officiated probably 100 weddings before ours. His illness had just started right around the time of the wedding, and there was some worry that he wasn't going to be able to do it. But you know what? He was so strong and he was so proud. He did such a wonderful job that I never even knew he was sick. A few years later, I had found out about the severity of his condition, and that our wedding was the last one. I am just so honored that we had the opportunity to have him be such an integral part of such one of the most special days in my life. The last time that we saw him was in June of 2021. I was pregnant with my daughter Morgan at the time. And when we visited him, they were in the middle of packing to move to Texas. They moved the very next week. And I was just so glad that we got to see them before they left. When we saw him, he still had his spirit and humor, and even though I could see how hard he tried to hide his embarrassment for not remembering everything and not saying everything properly, he knew what was happening to him, and it was hard. I'm sad that our daughter and her great-grandpa never officially met before he passed, even though, honestly, neither of them probably would have remembered it. But I would have. We miss you dearly, Grandpa Lynn, and I'm sure we won't meet again. But in the meantime, I will think of you. Every time I play a shuffleboard game, every pomegranate that I eat, every leather couch I sit on, and every time I see wild dolphins in the ocean, I will think of you. And lastly, seeing as it was just your birthday a couple days ago, I will leave with this. Happy birthday. Thank you.
Dad just loved music in so many different ways. He loved to sing. He loved just all these different artists. And one of the artists I remember a lot from back in the 70s around the house was Neil Diamond. Dad played a lot of Neil Diamond. And it was a song from Neil Diamond that was actually entitled Forever in Blue Jeans. But all this time, as a kid, I always thought he was saying the Reverend Blue Jeans. And I thought he was singing about my dad. So, when we were picking out songs to sing, I thought it was appropriate to sing a Neil Diamond song, and I rewrote the lyrics a little bit to make it what I always thought it should be, the Reverend Blue Jeans. For your talks, you dress in robes and ties and fancy socks. When you're hanging out at home with me, you'd much rather be the Reverend Blue Jeans. Suits are sweet, not what you like to wear to camp retreats. Pardon me, I'd like to say you do okay, forever in blue jeans.
Maybe tonight by the fire with some s'mores, you and I. Something abounds with the sounds of the songs that we sing.
You can talk, and you can sing and dance and walk the walk, but I know deep down and in between, you'd much rather be the Reverend Blue Jeans. Suits are sweet, not what you like to wear to camp retreats. If you pardon me, I'd like to say you do okay, forever in blue jeans.
Maybe tonight by the fire with some s'mores, you and I. Something abounds with the sounds of the songs that we sing. You can talk,
You can sing and dance and walk the walk, but I know that deep down in between, you'd much rather be
the Reverend Blue Jeans.
And if you pardon me,
say you do okay. Reverend Blue Jeans. As long as I can have you here with me, you'll always be Reverend Blue Jeans. You'll always be right here with me. You'll always be Reverend Blue Jeans.
Wow. Okay. I just want to say, first off, it means so much to me to see all of you here. I love you guys. I know Dad loved all of you. So, wow. Okay, let's see if I can get through this. Bear with me. I'm going to read some of this because it'll help me get through it. My dad, the Reverend Dr. James David Lynn, lived so many different roles for so many different people. He was a son, a brother, an athlete, a husband, a father, a minister, a scholar, a doctor, a teacher, a mentor, a singer, a traveler, a philosopher, a justice seeker, a peacemaker, an uncle, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather. Jim married my mother, Barbara Whitfield, in 1960, I believe, and moved his family to Hopewell, New Jersey to finish seminary in Drew University. Shortly thereafter, he became a father in 1962 when David Lawrence came into the world. He was assigned to his first church assignment in Hopewell, and it wasn't long after that that I came into the picture in 1965. My sister Pamela came to live with us in 66, and David and I were thrilled to have a sister that completed our family. Big sister to me, a younger sister to David. We were the three musketeers and made for quite a curious bunch. Our dad was assigned to a historic church in rural Windsor, New Jersey, that was built in 1840. We lived in the parsonage next door that became our everything. There was a swamp and a creek in the back that would freeze over in the winter. And the bigger kids would drag us around on sleds while they skated on the ice. The yard around the church had become the local cemetery. There were huge statues and monolithic tombstones in the graveyard that wrapped around behind our house. They'd run out of space, even in this rural community, that they'd actually started putting gravestones in between the house and the parsonage on this little sliver of grass just because they ran out of space. And so this became one of the most unique playgrounds of my childhood. And to this day, I've always felt a certain peace and comfort from beyond this earth when I scroll through old cemeteries. The sign outside the Windsor Methodist Church read, Sunday school, 10 a.m. Morning service, 11 a.m. Reverend James D. Lynn. Everybody welcome. Because, yeah, that's my dad. Dad moved the family out to Sacramento, California, having been assigned to Wesley Methodist Church, and then soon after as an associate pastor at the much larger First United Methodist Church of Sacramento across town. So began our many adventures on bikes and skates and pogo sticks around Sacramento. Dad would often take us along on Saturdays when he worked at his office. And the entire church sanctuary, social hall, chapel, and Sunday school classrooms became our playground. I still see it so vividly in my mind. As some families do, my parents decided to part their union in the early 70s. My dad took an assignment in Central California in the rural town of Farmersville. He had finally completed work on his doctorate at Princeton University in New Jersey, which required so much of his time and focus. And so began our monthly courtship with Greyhound Industries and our 6-hour bus ride to visit Dad in Farmersville. In 1974, Dad married Diane Jean, and we became a blended family of 3 girls and 3 boys that truly resembled the Brady Bunch. I was still the youngest and used that advantage anytime I was able. Who's spoiled? Diane, or Dee as she was affectionately known, brought 2 daughters and 1 son to our new blended family, Terry, Angela, and another David Earl. And on my mom's side, we gained an additional brother named David Anthony. So imagine the mix-ups with so many Davids. Even Dad's middle name was David. And I personally now had 3 brothers David. There's a country song that still needs to be finished there, My Brother's Dave. We counted how many Davids were actually present for my wedding, and we came up with 12. Almost 10% of the guest list. If you've ever had the pleasure of reading Dr. Seuss's poem, Too Many Daves, you might get the picture. Dad loved a good debate. And David Earl and Dad had a long-standing debate that lasted many years. Who was the greatest guitarist in history? Dad said classical guitarist Andre Segovia was a master in his field, and in his eyes, the greatest to ever play the instrument. David Earl had a strong argument for Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page, and they both held strong to their positions. I'm not sure who actually ever won that debate, but it was fun to watch their exchanges. Having 5 other siblings in your family can be a race for your parents' attention. And being the youngest, I had to work for my special times with Dad. Every year, Dad would host an Easter sunrise service up on a mountaintop. Dad would ask every year who wanted to get up early before the sunrise and help set up the service. Being the youngest, and with my siblings appreciating their sleep-in time on holidays, I found my niche. If I got up before dawn to go with Dad up the mountain in the dark, I would get him all to myself. Easter became my favorite holiday because of and I still feel Dad's presence when the sun rises on Easter morning. Over the years, I found lots of ways I could have special time with Dad. It was churchyard basketball pickup games, workouts together at the gym, backpacking adventures, metaphysical conversations, or road trips in the car. Wherever I went with Dad was okay with me, even if we sat in silence as we took in the scenery. My dad became more of an emotional softy as he got up into his senior years and would often get choked up telling a story. I used to joke with him and say, "I'm already like that. I'm going to be a mess when I'm 60. My dad was known to be so many things for so many people, but to me, he was always Dad. He lived with a secret his whole life. that I used to often wonder if he would reveal one day. But I think he was too humble to say it to the world. My dad, the Reverend Dr. James D. Lynn, was Superman. Sure, many of the signs were there. The thick-rimmed Clark Kent glasses, the mild-mannered day job, and always being of service. And what was up with getting up at 4:30 every morning to go running? I think he was up before the crack of dawn, tackling the injustices of the world while all the rest of us were sleeping. I began to figure it out early in my childhood and figured it out long before my teens even started. First off, his early morning runs, I think I was about 2.5 or 3, and I wanted to go see where he was going every morning. And my mom took me over to the high school track. He was running around, and I tried to keep up with him and chug around the track. But Dad just lapped me. I couldn't keep up with him, and I finally figured out, well, he was probably trying to go really fast and spin the world backwards at a different direction to go back in time to solve some injustices. Because that's my dad. And he was Superman. When I was about 7 or 8, he took me to a school carnival. And there was a bunch of games there. They had a little cork pop gun target shooting thing, and I actually hit a bullseye. Must have been that keen Superman eyesight that he passed down. But I got to pick out my prize, and it was a Robin Hood hat with a feather in it. And I put that on, and I was wearing it, and they had fire engine rides. That's how long ago that was. They'd never let that happen now with safety. But we got to ride on a fire truck on the outside of it. And so we're going around the block, riding on the fire truck, and my hat flew off. And immediately Dad noticed my disdain about losing my hat, and he said, "Hold on, stop the truck." And they slowed down and stopped, and he jumped off and said, I'm gonna go get the hat. And they said, okay. And then he walked back to get it, and he said, "Go on ahead. I'll come back. I'll just run back around and meet you." So by the time we got around the trip and got back to the school, there was Dad with my hat. Because that's my dad. He's Superman. And I remember youth group backpacking trip. Dad loved camping. We did lots of that. And it was our first backpacking trip. And I think Pam and I were the youngest of that trip. And, oh boy, we had just started going up the mountain, and already she and I both were complaining about how heavy our packs were. And either Dad was just too tired of hearing us complain, or knew that we needed to get going and get up the mountain. He grabbed my pack in his left arm, Pam's pack in his right arm, had his backpack on, and moved on up the mountain. Because that's my dad. And he was Superman. Dad was an avid swimmer. As David said, a lifeguard, and loved to swim. And he used to take us to an Olympic-sized pool at the college. I think it was at COS. And there was diving boards. There was a high dive and a short dive. And Dad could dive off the high dive and barely make a ripple into the water. But he could swim from one length of the pool to the other multiple times underwater without taking a breath. We were all amazed by that. But that's our dad, and he was Superman. we, later as an adult, shortly after my daughter Nadia was born, Dad had, they had planned a trip to go up Mount Whitney and asked if I wanted to go along. I said, yeah, I wanted to go along. And Larry and we were the youngsters on that trip. And we went up the mountain. And Larry and I kind of went ahead, and we were the first ones to actually, in our group, to make it up to the peak. I got severe altitude sickness. It was horrible. But as we were, and there's a little, up at the top, there's a lightning shack at the top of Mount Whitney at 14,500 feet. And there's a little, they had a little guest book up there. And I remember writing in the book up there. I signed in, and it had comments, and I put, "Never again," because I was feeling so awful. But we made it, and then Larry and I started going back down. And then we saw Dad. He was still coming up because he was waiting with his friend Steve, trying to get up the mountain. And Steve was a little bit older than Dad. And I think Dad was, at that time, about my age now. I think he was 57 or so, which is what I am now. And I think about that and go, wow, okay. And, but Dad had said to us, he said, I'm going to go up and make it up to the peak and then go back down. But if you see Steve on the way back down the mountain, and Steve was walking with a walking stick, had a bad knee, he said, see if you can convince him that he probably shouldn't try and go all the way up because we're losing light. And so Larry and I said, okay, as we trudged back down, and we, along the way, about probably, I don't know, a mile or two down, we ran into Steve, and we tried logic with Steve, saying, it's later in the afternoon, it's going to get dark soon, it's not going to be a good place to be up on the mountain. There was snow up there even in July at the peak. And, it's probably a good idea to turn around. But no, he was determined, he was stubborn, he'd come this way, he was going to go up. So we finished going back down the hill. And then I was so worried as it got darkness set in and they weren't back yet. And I was feeling horrible, and I remember making something to eat and forcing myself to have some stew or some soup or something so I could get some kind of strength. And then Larry and I decided, okay, we're going to go back up and try and find them. We had flashlights and things. And we started going up a little ways, and then Dad was coming down. It was dark. And I was so delighted to see him. He made it, and he said, well, I went back, and Steve was adamant about going up to the peak, and he really wanted to make it, so I waited for him. And I went up, and we made it, even though I knew it was going to be really dark. But that's how important it was. Dad wasn't going to leave somebody up there, even though he knew it was going to be dangerous. Because that's the kind of person Dad was. He was Superman. So even, 5 years ago, it's about maybe 6 years ago now, 2016, Dad was going in for surgery, that he had a blockage. This was after his heart surgery years before. And they were going to put a stent in. And I said, Dad, I really want to come up there for that. And he said, oh, no, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. This isn't what's going to take me out. And I said, I know that, but I'd still like to be there. And so I asked my daughter, Olivia, she was there with me, do you want to go up with me? And she did, and I was really grateful for that. And we went up, and Dad was in surgery for a good while. And he came out of surgery, and I went in to talk with the doctor, and the doctor said, I wasn't able to do anything. Wasn't able to put a stent in because 2 of your dad's bypasses, the tissues, had failed from the surgery. He said they normally last about anywhere 5 to 15 years, and your dad's, these two they're kind of like paper straws. They're not working anymore, and he's the side wall of his heart. It's really thin. He's got an aneurysm, and it could burst at any time, and his aortic valve is faulty. And I said, what can we do? And he said, well, at this point, we can just give him some blood thinners and make him comfortable, and, I'm not sure how much longer he's gonna be around. Well, that was over 5 years ago. Dad had a zest for life, and he wasn't going to take that as an answer, if that's what it was going to be. Because he's my dad. He's Superman. So, I just want to say, it was Dad's birthday a couple of days ago. He would have been 85. And I'm just so grateful that I got to be part of his life for 57 of those years. And Dad, you'll always be Superman to me. Thank you.
In your hymnals once again, this is another one of Dad's favorite hymns, number 707, Hymn of Promise. In the bulb there is a flower, in the seed an apple tree, in cocoons a hidden promise, butterflies will soon be free. In the cold and snow of winter, there's a spring that waits to be unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. There's a song in every silence, seeking word and melody. There's a dawn in every darkness, bringing hope to you and me. From the past will come the future, what it holds a mystery, unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. In our end is our beginning, in our time infinity. In our doubt there is believing, in our life eternity. In our death a resurrection, at the last a victory, unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. And now if there's any others of you that would like to share anything about Dad, you can come up and go to the pulpit and be a minister for a little bit.
I had the pleasure of getting to know Jim the last 2 years of his life. spending time first in Ashland, Oregon, and then in Azle, Texas. Because of Jim's disease, it's quite possible I got to know one of the purest versions of himself, uninfluenced by any prior knowledge of any of his other more polished or poised versions. What I got to know was a playful and big-hearted dad. Jim had a constant thirst for learning and an enjoyment of the meaning of words. He was a maestro of puns and had a flair for music and singing. He liked good morning coffee, watching basketball, plotting to ride off on his bicycle, and checking the mail regularly. And what struck me the most of all was how in love with his wife, Dee, he was. He was like a young man with puppy love when it came to Dee. It warmed my heart, lifted my spirits, and made me laugh. John and I visited him for his 84th birthday. He was delighted, animated, and joined us, Dave and Carol, via FaceTime, for a round of his favorite version of Happy Birthday, Dirge style. He even very much enjoyed experiencing Trip, an existential visual kaleidoscope meditation program on the virtual reality headset we brought. John and I visited again in the fall, right before he passed. He enjoyed the real half and half for his coffee that we brought him, a stroll through the gardens in the warm Texas sun, and of course, his son, John. I was impressed with how respectful and kind to him his support staff were, and how Jim held on to his dignity, his sense of self, and the love for his family. I think he passed with a lot of class. Thanks.
Unless anyone else wants to share. We have the words in the program. As I said, my dad was a Beatles fan, but in looking over some of the songs by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, we thought this one would be appropriate, especially. So please feel free to sing with us Imagine by John Lennon.
There's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. And imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. No religion true. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and then the world will live as one.
more song that was a favorite of Dad's in the hymnal. There's number 347, Spirit Song.
Is there anything, David, that needs to be instructed or anything before we do the benediction and depart?
Just know that there's a reception downstairs.
Downstairs?
Yes.
Okay. I invite you to stand, and if you're inclined to join your hands or elbows or whatever. We had in the Tahoe Resort Ministry, I did church services for the skiers at the top of Squaw Valley and then later at North Star. Every Sunday I'd have my ski pants on under my robe. When I finished the church in Truckee, I would drive up to North Star and go up the lift. And St. Paul had what we began to call the skier's benediction. And it begins with the words, "And now unto the one who is able to keep you from falling." So, hear these words that St. Paul wrote so many years ago, but still move me. And thanks for the last hymn. It's just beautiful. And now unto the one who is able to keep us from falling and to present us faultless before his presence with exceeding joy. To the only wise God, our Savior, be glory and majesty, dominion and power this day and forevermore. In your loving Spirit, God, we pray. And thank you for the life of Dr. James Lynn. Amen. I always said to my congregation, hugs are good if you're into that.